Me and Bruno over here, we're just having a little debate about whether having excess body fat inhibits muscle gains. Bruno seems to think that it does, and I said, well, I don't know. I've seen some people with a pretty good amount of body fat still make gains, but he argues differently, and unfortunately, it turns out that Bruno is the one who was right, because there's some evidence that having excess body fat can hinder muscle gains. How is that possible? Well, first of all, you have to understand body fat. What was that, Bruno? Yeah, I'm going to get to the adipokines in a second. Hold on. Body fat is not an inert tissue. Formerly, years ago, it was thought that body fat or lipocytes, any way you want to call them, fat cells, were basically inert storage sites for energy. In other words, excess energy was stored as triglyceride in fat cells. And that's all that body fat was thought to do. In the last couple of years, however, it's turned out that come on, look in the camera, Bruno. In the last couple of years, well, Bruno he's not comfortable here, so I'm going to let him go. In the last couple of years, it turns out that science has realized that fat cells are a lot more active than was previously believed. In fact, you could say that fat cells are kind of their own little mini endocrine organs. They secrete over 100 different substances collectively known as adipokines. Adipokines have an action similar to what they call cytokines. Cytokines are proteins produced by the immune system that are largely inflammatory. And adipokines are also largely inflammatory. I'm not obviously I'm not going to mention all 100 or so adipokines, but I will mention two that might be familiar to some of you with a little bit of a science background. That would be leptin and adiponectin. Leptin is a pretty famous adipokine. It was discovered in the late 90s, where it was thought to be a cure for obesity, because when they injected into very obese rats, the rats or mice, I can't remember whether it might have been rats and mice, I don't remember, but it was Rockefeller University that did the original research, Jules Hirsch. He injected leptin. It has to be injected because it's a protein, a polypeptide protein, which would normally be broken down if you ingested it orally. When he injected it into these rats, they literally lost all their body fat. And all the headlines in the media said, cure for body fat now found, or cure for obesity. It was thought that leptin would now once and for all be the ultimate cure for obesity. And even people that couldn't follow a diet or anything like that could now lose body fat. It didn't work out that way, because it turned out that it took them about 4 years to realize that, if anything, obese people tend to overproduce leptin. Leptin, actually, the problem is that leptin cannot, there's a kind of resistance to leptin in the brain, which prevents the brain from sensing leptin. And among leptin's main functions is to help control appetite. In other words, when leptin is low, you tend to be hungry, right? When you go on certain diets, leptin tends to get lower. It's one of the reasons why it's hard to stay on a diet, because your appetite goes up. Leptin, I'm going to have an article on leptin in my Applied Metabolics newsletter very soon. And in the article, I'm going to talk about natural ways to control leptin. This is a tremendous, tremendous benefit to anyone who wants to control body fat, also build muscle, because leptin is also involved in testosterone metabolism and a myriad of other functions in the body. But my article will talk about some ways to control leptin that just about nobody knows about except certain scientists in far corners of the world. But I'm going to reveal these, and they're all natural. But getting back to this body fat thing, when you have a lot of body fat, of course, the more fat cells you have, the greater the amount of adipokines secreted. The adipokines, like I said, the vast majority of them are inflammatory in nature. The inflammation that results is a systemic or body-wide inflammation that tends to stimulate the release of some of these other cytokines, and collectively you have an effect of muscle catabolism, muscle breakdown. So in other words, that's one reason. That's reason A why obese people have trouble gaining muscle, is because their body fat causes them to secrete an excess of adipokines and inflammatory cytokines, which tend to block the muscle building process through various technical mechanisms that I can't get into in this video because they're extremely technical, and most of you would completely fall asleep after about 2 minutes of listening to them. But I will go into some detail about this stuff in my Applied Metabolics newsletter for those who are interested. But suffice to say that one of the main reasons why it's difficult to build muscle when you have a lot of body fat is because of the secretion of these adipokines. Another reason why it's difficult to build muscle when you have excess body fat is because people with excess body fat tend to also secrete larger amounts of insulin because their muscles are insulin insensitive. Now, what happens is, I'm sure a lot of people who are looking at this video, because of all the publicity about insulin, know that one of its jobs is to promote the entry of amino acids into muscle. The way it does that is by, and again, not too many people are aware of this, insulin stimulates amino acid uptake by promoting the synthesis in small blood vessels in the muscle of nitric oxide. The nitric oxide dilates the blood vessels, the small blood vessels in the muscle, the microvessels they're called, and actually facilitates the entry of amino acids into muscle. So if you're insulin resistant, that means the insulin is not working properly at the muscle cell level. You're not getting the amino acids into muscle, which of course creates problems for muscle protein synthesis, which is the cornerstone of muscle hypertrophy. So that's a second reason why people with a lot of body fat have trouble building muscle, because they can't utilize amino acids to the same extent because of insulin insensitivity. So those are the main reasons why. And there's another, I guess a lesser reason would be that eating a lot of fat, there's a lot of publicity. I did a past video on saturated fat and a lot of the myths attendant with it. But the truth of the matter is that when you eat a lot of fat, some animal studies show and a couple of human studies show that it can actually interfere with muscle protein synthesis also, specifically the activity of a protein called the mechanistic target of rapamycin, or mTOR, which is the cornerstone or the pivotal substance in the muscle protein synthesis process. A lot of people who are obese tend to eat a lot of saturated fat or fat in their diet, especially saturated fat. And saturated fat, of course, also contains the most dense source of calories at 9 per gram. So if you're very active and you're working out and you don't eat a lot of carbohydrates, the fat is way less of a problem. However, if you're sedentary, you're not working out, and you have a lot of body fat, eating a lot of saturated fat will definitely, unquestionably, create metabolic problems, including selectively destroying the beta cells of the pancreas that actually produce insulin. This is what happens when you're sedentary and you eat a lot of saturated fat. A lot of people also don't know that. So saturated fat, again, it depends on the context. If you're very active and you have an otherwise good diet and you don't eat a lot of carbohydrates, saturated fat is more or less not too dangerous. I wouldn't call it benign, but it's controllable. However, again, if you're sedentary, if you're not working out, the picture vastly changes, where saturated fat becomes extremely negative. So saturated fat cannot be considered an innocent bystander in health problems that many people have. So just again, it depends on the situation. So those are the basic reasons why people who have a lot of body fat have trouble building muscle, because they're in a state of inflammation all the time. And also because they tend to be insulin insensitive and their body cannot use insulin properly. Interestingly enough, though, from the point of view of testosterone, when you're obese, you tend to have, strangely, and this might be surprising, actually have higher levels of testosterone, because what happens is testosterone is carried in the bloodstream attached to a protein produced in the liver called sex hormone binding globulin. And it turns out that because insulin is one of the substances, there's several of them, that actually separate testosterone from the sex hormone binding globulin carrier in the blood. Now, when testosterone is bound to SHBG, as it's called, it's inactive. It's just circulating in the blood, but it can't act with androgen receptors, so it has no anabolic activity. The only anabolic activity that derives from testosterone is when the hormone is not bound to sex hormone binding globulin. In other words, when it's free. Free hormone can interact with androgen receptors and produce anabolic effects. It turns out that insulin disassociates SHBG from testosterone, meaning that it increases levels of free testosterone. Now, having high testosterone normally helps lower levels of body fat. So you might be asking, well, wait a minute, how could this be? Isn't it contradictory? You just said that obese people have higher levels of free testosterone because of less binding of sex hormone binding globulin due to insulin. How come they're not slim and muscular? Well, here's what happens. The problem with obese people is, yes, they have higher levels of free testosterone for those reasons, but they also produce greater amounts of an enzyme than many of you have heard of called aromatase. Aromatase works to convert androgens, including testosterone, into estrogen. There's only one carbon difference between estrogen and testosterone, and aromatase basically catalyzes the conversion of androgens into estrogen. And aromatase is found in various parts of the body, muscle, brains, but especially fat stores, especially peripheral fat stores, your arms and your legs. So, of course, obese people have more or greater fat stores in their arms and their legs. This, by the way, is called ectopic fat. And this is a dangerous type of fat because fat under the skin, called subcutaneous fat, is not as active metabolically as fat in other parts of the body. Fat is not supposed to be in organs or in your lower abdomen like visceral fat. This is called ectopic fat, and it's very dangerous because it's kicking out these adipokines all over your body and raising the level of systemic inflammation. But back to the point, the peripheral areas of for example, the arms and the legs, if they have larger amounts of fat, the activity of aromatase goes up dramatically. So in obese people, yes, they're producing more free testosterone, but when it circulates in the blood and encounters the aromatase enzyme, it's converted into estrogen. So the obese people having the larger amount of free testosterone, it doesn't help them because a lot of it's largely being converted into estrogen. So that explains why having the larger amounts of free testosterone in obese people doesn't really help the situation, because if they did have, let's say, unrestricted free testosterone, it would go a great distance towards helping them lose body fat, because testosterone, without question, does help you lose body fat. I've seen men go on testosterone replacement therapy who, typical, let's say, guy about 40, 50 years old, he doesn't work out much. He has skinny arms, skinny legs, but a fat belly and fat gut. I've seen these guys go on testosterone replacement therapy and actually lose 3 or 4 inches off their waist with no exercise and no change in diet. What happens there is that, when you get older, the beta androgenic receptors in your abdomen, for example, they tend to close out. Now, what's the significance of that? The beta androgenic receptors interact with catecholamines like norepinephrine and epinephrine to release fat from fat cells. And when the beta adrenic cell receptors are not active, or when they've closed out, your body tends to hold on to the fat, and in this case, it's in the belly. Now, when you take testosterone, you actually reopen the dormant beta receptors in your abdomen, so now you can tap into the body fat there, and your body starts to utilize the fat in the abdomen, and that explains the 2 or 3 or more inches lost on the waist when men undergo testosterone therapy. I will quickly add, however, you don't want to go on testosterone therapy just to lose fat on your waist. That's like shooting a bee with a shotgun, 12-gauge shotgun. That's overkill. But however, you go on testosterone therapy only if you're clinically shown to be deficient in testosterone. The loss of belly fat is a bonus. You should not use testosterone for that reason alone, although I will be writing an article about how, in my Applied Metabolics newsletter, about how testosterone used in a certain way can actually help to treat both obesity and prevent type 2 diabetes. This is an emerging therapy that most doctors aren't aware of, but I'm going to be talking about it in the newsletter. Uh, Now, secondary question to about related to can you y-axis body fat prevents helps to blunt muscle gains. Secondary question that comes up is, can you build muscle? This is a very common question. Can you build muscle and lose fat at the same time? Until recently, the answer to that is unlikely and very difficult. Uh, you see guys who use a lot of anabolic steroids and other drugs. They seem to put on muscle and lose body fat, but it's kind of like more like a drug effect. I'm talking about naturally, not with any drugs involved. So the question is, can you build muscle and lose body fat at the same time? And the answer is yes. And what are the requirements? The requirements are, first of all, most important, and I've talked about this in my Applied Metabolics newsletter. If you want to lose body fat and build muscle at the same time or simultaneously, you have to follow a high protein diet. And I'm talking about protein at the upper end of the scale. The recommended range of protein to develop more muscle mass is 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. That upper end of the scale, 2.2 grams per kilogram, that equals about 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. And this is what I would recommend for somebody who wants to lose body fat and build muscle at the same time. You should aim to eat 1 gram of protein per pound of targeted body weight. In other words, if you want to weigh, let's say, 170 pounds, I suggest ingesting 170 grams of protein, not all at once, of course, in divided meals throughout the day. And again, as I pointed out, again, in Applied Metabolics, eating excess protein, even if that tends to be a little bit too much protein, it's not going to harm you, and it's definitely not going to make you fat, because in active people, excess protein as amino acids is oxidized. It is not converted into body fat like some dietitians still say on the internet, which is completely wrong. That's something that's found in textbooks and not reality. Okay, so the first principle for those who want to gain muscle and lose body fat is to, again, consume the upper end of protein requirements to build muscle, 1 gram per pound of body weight. The second method to build muscle and lose fat at the same time, and this is something that's hard for people to do, is to not rush the weight loss. Don't try and lose too much weight too fast, because when you do that, even when you're eating enough protein, if you try and go on like really crash diets at 500 calories, 700 calories, something like that, or even 1,000 calories, even 1,200 in a man, you're going to slip into a catabolic state. I know I keep saying this, but I'm going to have an upcoming article about some of the misconceptions about negative calorie balance and body composition. It's going to be in Applied Metabolics, but here's a little preview. If your calories go too low, in an effort to lose weight faster, no matter how high your protein intake is, you're going to lose a lot of muscle. Your resting metabolism is going to drop, and your weight loss is going to slow considerably. So you'll be actually blunting fat loss and losing muscle, just the opposite of what you want to do if you try and lose weight too fast. So how much weight should you lose each week, or what amount of, let's say, weight should you aim for? That would be 2 pounds. You want to lose 2 pounds of weight each week. Now, physiologically, a lot of people don't realize your body is only capable of losing 3 pounds of fat a week. Of course, people lose more weight than that. For example, when people start on low-carb diets, but the weight loss is consisting of mostly water loss due to, let's say, glycogen breakdown because of the lack of carbohydrates. The truth is that you can only really lose pure fat would be about 3 pounds a week. The old equation for that is if you reduce your caloric intake by 500 calories, you lose 1 pound a week. If you reduce your total caloric intake by 1,000 calories, you lose 2 pounds a week. So I would aim for 2 pounds a week weight loss. That will tend to spare your muscle tissue while fostering a consistent body fat loss. And again, with the high protein aspect, you'll be able to build muscle at the same time. The next principle of how to build muscle and lose fat at the same time is, and this is, I know it's almost stupid to say this, but I have to, is to lift weights. Now, and it's not as obvious as you think, because when you lift weights, people don't realize there's anabolic signals that are brought about in muscle just by the mere action of muscle contraction. In fact, studies of rats done, about 40, 50 years ago, they did studies with rats. They put them on the equivalent of human starvation diets, but they had the rats exercise. I think the scientist was Goldberg who did this, if I remember correctly. He had the rats exercise very intensely on a starvation diet, and they all gained muscle. Despite the fact that they're on a starvation diet, they gain muscle because of the exercise. So lifting weights alone, the anabolic signals that are stimulated by lifting weights alone in your muscle will actually help you build muscle while you're losing fat at the same time. So, if you want to build muscle and lose fat, not lifting weights is going against the grain. It's stupid. It doesn't make any sense. So that's the next, that principle, lift weights. You don't have to go crazy. You don't have to train 7 days a week. You don't have to train 5 hours a day. That's all nonsense. Just do a judicious, let's say at the maximum 2-hour weight training program. Anywhere from 4 to 5 days a week is more than enough. Sometimes 3 days a week is enough. You could work each muscle once a week that's fine. The whole key is to lift weights. The final principle that I would tell you to build muscle and lose fat at the same time is to don't overdo the cardiovascular work or aerobics. A lot of people in their efforts to lose body fat will I was just talking to a top pro bodybuilder just yesterday in the gym. I won't mention his name. And he tells me that he's doing 3 hours a day of aerobics in preparation for the Mr. Olympia. I didn't say anything, but my internal thoughts were, well, buddy, it's good that you're taking a shitload of drugs, because if you weren't, you'd be burning out muscle like a bonfire. Because the guy was on a restricted diet. He's doing 3 hours of aerobics a day. If he wasn't taking the steroids, the guy would be losing muscle like you wouldn't believe. Aerobics are very good for losing body fat, because body fat can only be burned in the presence of oxygen, and aerobics, the greatest feature of oxygen is the increased oxygen intake that occurs when you do aerobics. So there's no question that aerobics helps fat loss, helps increase fat oxidation, but you don't need a lot of it. I personally think that 30 minutes is more than enough to accomplish this. And if you do high-intensity interval aerobics, which I explain what that is in my Applied Metabolics newsletter, and in a previous video I also talked about high-intensity intervals, you actually need even less time. You can get a solid fat-burning interval, high-intensity interval aerobic workout in, believe it or not, 15 to 20 minutes. That's it. 20 minutes of high-intensity interval aerobics equals 60 to 90 minutes of steady-state aerobics. So for those of you who are short on time, high-intensity interval aerobics are the way to go, but it's not fun. You can't, play with your cell phone or read books. It's very intense. You got to be really bringing your heart rate up for it to work. So anyway, that's about it for this. I hope this video was informative. And for those of you who do want in-depth information, one of my upcoming articles in Applied Metabolics, I'm going to talk about the complete science of body fat. I have stuff that's going to be in this article that is going to just blow your mind, as far as, believe me, you never knew the extent of how body fat works and what it really does. It's all going to be in my article about the science of body fat. I'm also going to, like I said earlier, I'm going to have an article on how to control leptin through natural methods without using any drugs in a very safe manner, which is extremely useful to anybody on a diet. All this, that's going to be in my Applied Metabolics newsletter. I cover nutrition, supplements. I tell you the truth about supplements. I don't hold anything back because I'm not associated with any food supplement company. I'm not on the payroll like a lot of these PhDs you see online, where they're getting paid, by supplement companies to tout the products. They're not giving you the truth. I also cover exercise science, fat loss techniques that really work, hormonal therapy such as testosterone replacement therapy, women's health, and other topics. So, if you want to have the most in-depth information, I call it a newsletter, but the truth of the matter is it's 40 to 50 pages every month. So it's more like a monthly ebook. Comes out on the first of every month. And if you subscribe, I'll send you an invitation to join my private Applied Metabolics Facebook page, where I post brand new information on exercise science, nutrition, and medicine every day. And I also answer questions on the Facebook page. I also have an email portal on my Applied Metabolics site, where I will answer brief questions submitted only by subscribers. I don't answer unsolicited questions. It has to be from subscribers only. And also, if you thought this video was any good at all, please let others know about it, so they can know the existence of my my YouTube channel. There's a lot of other YouTube channels. So I won't mention any names. Some of these guys are getting, 300, 400,000 views, in 2 days. And when I look at it, to me, it's like I watch these videos when I want to have a good laugh, because they're nonsensical. The information's completely wrong. These people have not much of a physique to begin with. Some of these young guys have abs and with 14-inch arms, and somehow they seem to impress a lot of other young guys their age. I don't have the heart to tell them that you can get abs just by not eating. You don't even have to work out. It's pathetic. But I don't want to go into another long rant here. So, subscribe today to my Applied Metabolics newsletter, www.appliedmetabolics.com. And if you want to have the best friend you'll ever have, you saw Bruno at the beginning of this video. Boy, he's a great friend. Let me tell you, this guy, he's a terrific friend. Go to your local shelter, adopt a dog. I'm telling you, these dogs, they love you. Nobody will love you as much as a dog other than your own mother and possibly your father. I'm telling you, your wife, your girlfriend, they'll never love you unconditionally like a dog. Anyway, I don't think your cat will love you that much either, but some people would argue that point. Anyway, take care. Bye-bye.